If you're looking to build a PC around Intel's 12th Gen CPU but on a budget, look no further, this is the board for you. This is the ASRock B660 Steel Legend and it represents a good value for the money for a decent mid-range build. Stick until the end to see all the features of this board. So if you decide to get this board, and by the way you should, it's a great board with more than decent price to feature ratio, this is what you will get in the box. There is a quick software installation guide and a quick installation guide for the board itself, which contains useful info on how to connect everything to the board if you are inexperienced, in which case I can recommend my PC build guide tutorial, check the info at the corner. The next item on the list is the infamous coffee mug coaster and a postcard. We also have two SATA cables for SSD or HDD drives, some Velcro straps, several NVMe screws, a nice keyboard keycap with Steel Legend logo and a keychain ring in the shape of a Steel Legend board, which is totally cool by the way. This board has a separate back I/O shield, so don't forget to install this first when you start your build. Of course, here is the board in the traditional urban camo theme with an LGA 1700 CPU socket, but with the support for DDR4 RAM slots, which can actually save you some time and ease the transition onto the new platform. You can see that there are a lot of M.2 slots for NVMe drives, which I welcome as I think the time has come for hard drives to move out your PCs. Let me show you the connections on this board and the features it has. Starting from the top, one EPS 8-pin CPU power connector, one CPU fan header, all fan headers are PWM by the way, so I won't mention that again, and you also get two additional fan headers up top, both with support for water pumps. Right below them we have two 5V addressable RGB headers, and I welcome this decision that manufacturers include more 5V ARGB headers since almost every device now has some sort of RGB on it. In the middle of the board there is the LGA 1700 CPU socket for the support for Alder Lake CPUs, but bear in mind that this is a budget-oriented board. It has B660 chipset, which is not meant for overclocking in mind and some heavy workload, so if you're planning to put an i9 on this board, think twice, it's not made for it. I mean, you can do it, but it is not advisable. And here is why: the power delivery simply isn't quite enough. This board has a 10-phase power delivery design with 9 phases dedicated to the CPU or the V-core. The 8-pin EPS connector sends power to a Realtek RT3628AE9 channel controller, sending power directly to the 50 amps Vishay 6654 Dr. Moss integrated power stages. The 450 amps available to V-core is much lower than what we are used to, but again, as mentioned before, B660 boards cannot overclock the CPU, so it only has to support Intel's stock configuration, and this is why I said that installing i9 here is not recommended. VRMs would simply go red from heating. Below the CPU socket we have a Gen 4 M.2 slot, which is in direct connection with the CPU, so this is where you would place your fastest drive. Below the M.2 slot we have the PCIe Gen 5 X16 slot for your GPU. Again, this is something that I wasn't expecting, since this is a budget board. This could have easily been Gen 4 slot and you would not feel any difference, because even now the Gen 3 X16 bandwidth is not fully saturated. Right from the CPU socket we have 4 DIMM slots with the support for DDR4 RAM, which could save you a few bucks as you would not have to buy the still expensive DDR5 modules. The max capacity is up to 128GB with more than plenty speed support up to 5000 MHz. Okay, let's move on to the bottom half of the board. Below the first PCIe slot there is another M.2 slot, and this one is supporting Gen 3 by 4 speeds. And below it there is one PCIe Gen 3 by 1 slot and another PCIe Gen 3 by 16 slot. But below that one, to the left of it, there is yet another M.2 slot, but this one is reserved for the Wi-Fi or the Bluetooth model, and yet there is another one right from it marked Hyper M.2, and this one is actually Gen 4 by 4 directly in contact with the chipset. Of course, below all those M.2 slots there is yet another PCIe Gen 3 by 1 slot. On the right side of the motherboard, starting from the bottom to the top, one fan header, 4 SATA ports, front USB 3.0 and front USB Type-C connections, and a 24-pin power connector. On the bottom of the board, from left to right, the HD audio connector for the ALC897 codec, which is not the latest and greatest because this is still a budget board, so things must be kept in that category. Anyhow, it still sounds great thanks to the gold Nichicon caps. Okay, moving further, 5V and 12V RGB header, TPM connector, USB 2.0 connector, one more fan header, front panel connector, two more SATA connectors that are controlled by the AS Media ASM 1061 SATA controller. B660 chipset supports RAID 0, 1, 5 and 10 modes for SATA devices, and there's no mention of RAID support for NVMe drives. Oh, and this configuration does have some lane sharing due to the B660's reduction in PCIe lane count. So if a SATA type M.2 device occupies the second M.2 slot, the SATA 0 port will be disabled, and you can run 3 M.2 storage devices, one SATA with 5 SATA ports in a worst case scenario. If you only have M.2 drives, you can run all 6 SATA ports and all M.2s concurrently. Back of the board, the I/O shield is as follows: the PS.5 mouse keyboard combo port, two USB 2.0 ports, HDMI 2.1, DisplayPort 1.4 outs, USB Type-C connector, the BIOS flashback button, which I am actually surprised to see on a budget board, but still cool, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, 2.5 gigabit LAN port, and 7.1 audio channels with a digital SPDIF connector as well. And as mentioned before, you need to use a separate I/O shield as it doesn't come pre-installed on the board, and you can see that it comes with the holes for Wi-Fi antenna if you decide to install the card later. The chipset heatsink is passively cooled as well as the first M.2 slot, and there is yet another fan connector next to the M.2 shield. Behind the chipset cooler there are hidden LEDs that illuminate nicely and not over the top, but the same could not be said for the Steel Legend branding next to the 24-pin connector. Thankfully, all of these can be turned off, so there are no issues there. Moving to the BIOS, which is not the black, gray, white camo theme, it's actually teal and black. Upon entering, you are greeted with an easy mode. This mode displays the basic stuff: CPU speed, memory speed, fan speeds, boot drives, and all the basic stuff. Pressing the F6 will take you to the advanced stuff, and here you have more than plenty of options to change CPU voltage, memory voltage, activate memory XMP profiles, and so on. You can even set RGB lights directly in the BIOS, which in return doesn't require any additional software in Windows, and I actually appreciate it this way. Although you can install the polychrome software if you wish, so I kinda prefer it this way and avoid all unnecessary software in Windows. You can also set all the fans here as well and all the curves and ramps for it, so again avoiding one piece of the software as well, the A-tuning. ASRock also offers additional software for audio control with Nahimic effect support. It's cool to have, but not essential. Making a budget build with this board is super easy. I mean, it will not break your wallet, coming at only $159 US. It really is a great value to performance choice. I paired it with Intel i3 12100F and with a DDR4 memory, which is still decently priced. I did add a Gen 4 drive here, so I can use the benefits of those speeds, as the price between this and Gen 3 drive is really negligible. It offers pretty decent performance for a 1080p gaming oriented build. I would suggest this board to be paired with an Intel i5-12400 CPU because it's literally the best bang for the buck for a decent budget build. RAM should be at least 3600 MHz for that sweet spot, and with an adequate GPU. Something like a 3060 would be a perfect choice here, and a build like this would not be so expensive. It would still be around $1100 to $1200 US, and it's pretty capable for a great 1080p experience, but also as in 1440p gaming. But I would not suggest this board for builds with a K CPU or anything beyond i5 CPU. Simply said, VRMs are not designed for that kind of a power draw. Not that this is a bad board, simply it is not meant for those kinds of CPUs, as it does not have massive heatsinks on the VRMs and actually not enough power phases to support them in the first place. But where this board shines is a mid-range build, something that everyone can afford, something that would work out of the box without much tinkering from the user side, so consider putting this board on your short list for a budget-friendly, non-overclocking board, as the B660 chipset has everything that the user needs to get most things done and still have a time to game on a side. Thanks to ASRock for the review sample, and thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing to the channel for more future content. See you in the next one.